If you like long, real-world horror and mystery stories told in this style, please remember to like the video and subscribe. It helps a lot and lets me keep making these deep stories for you. Tonight's first two cases are both about women who turned up dead in places they never should have been, and whose identities and killers still haven't been proven decades later. 1. The Woman in the Wych Elm. On April 18, 1943, 4 boys from the English Midlands slipped into Hagley Wood near Wychbury Hill in Worcestershire. They weren't supposed to be there. The land belonged to an estate, but they were doing what a lot of kids did then: bird nesting, climbing trees, raiding nests, collecting eggs. Deep in the wood, they found a huge, old wych elm tree. It was the kind birds loved, with thick branches and a wide trunk. The best climber of the group, a boy we'll call Robert, scrambled up into it looking for nests. When he got high enough, he realized the center of the trunk was hollow. Curious, he leaned in and looked down. Staring back up at him from the dark was a human skull. Not some old animal bone. This one still had hair attached to it and teeth in the jaw. Robert almost fell. The other boys shouted up to ask what was wrong. He scrambled down and told them. They were kids trespassing on a rich man's land in wartime Britain. In their minds, getting caught might mean strict parents, police, or worse. So they did what a lot of kids would do when they're in over their heads. They went home. They said nothing. That night, one of the boys, Thomas, woke up screaming. He told his parents about a dream in which a woman was trapped inside a tree, alive, as the trunk grew around her like a prison. In the dream, she was calling his name, begging him to help her, and he couldn't move or speak. When his parents calmed him down enough to talk, he finally admitted what the boys had found in Hagley Wood. The next morning, Thomas's parents went to the local police station and reported it. Officers followed the directions, found the same wych elm, and checked the hollow properly. Inside, they found an almost complete skeleton of a woman, a gold ring on one finger, scraps of clothing that had rotted with time, and during a search of the ground nearby, the bones of one severed hand. The hand had been cut off before the body was stuffed into the tree. Forensic work, by 1940s standards, was careful but limited. The pathologist concluded the woman was likely in the tree for no more than 18 months, making her probable time of death around late 1941. A piece of cloth jammed into her mouth suggested she'd been gagged and may have died of asphyxiation. The way her body fit into the trunk suggested she was placed in there soon after death. Once rigor mortis fully set in, her body would have been too stiff. Police believed they had enough to identify her. A physical description from the bones, her dental pattern, the ring and clothing fragments, but wartime Britain was chaos. Tens of thousands of people had been displaced or killed in bombing raids. Records were a mess. Many missing people had never been reported properly, or their files had been scattered. Police cross-checked hundreds of missing person reports, sent her dental pattern to dentists across the UK. No match. The woman in the tree had no official name. The public, on the other hand, latched onto the case. It had all the ingredients of an urban legend: a skull in a tree, boys trespassing, a severed hand, a war in the background. 1 year later, in 1944, someone made it worse. On a local monument, the Hagley obelisk, and later on walls around the area, someone began writing graffiti. Who put BELLA in the WICH elm? The name Bella had not appeared in any of the public police statements. Whoever was writing that graffiti either knew something about her real name or wanted to make it look like they did. The case picked up a new name, Bella in the Wych Elm. The question in the graffiti has never been answered. Over the decades, several main theories have taken shape. Theory 1, the missing Birmingham woman. One lead suggested the body might be a woman from Birmingham, a sex worker known locally as Bella, who went missing around 1941 and was only formally reported missing in 1944. Supporters of this theory point out the timing roughly matches. Bella could be a shortened form of Bella. The delayed report might explain why police didn't find a match during their initial search. The problem is that the surviving paperwork is thin, and there's no way at this point to prove that the woman in the tree and Bella were the same person. Theory 2, Jack Mossop's confession. Another thread comes from a man named Jack Mossop, who was a patient at a mental hospital after the war. According to a story told by his family years after his death, Jack had once confessed that he and a friend had been drinking at a local pub near Hagley. They'd left with a heavily intoxicated woman who had pestered them to buy her drinks. She de-vomited in the car, so as a lesson, they'd de-driven her into the woods, put her into a hollow tree, and left her there, assuming she'd wake up and be frightened into changing her ways. If that's even partly true, the woman could have died of exposure or suffocation, and the tree could be the Wych Elm. But there are major problems. Mossop was mentally ill by the time he allegedly told this story. There's no clear reason for anyone in that scenario to cut off her hand. There's no corroborating witness for any of it. To this day, it's treated more as a maddening maybe than a solid lead. Theory 3, occult murder and the hand of glory. In 1945, anthropologist Margaret Murray suggested something darker. The missing hand, she argued, fitted old European folklore around the hand of glory, a ritual object supposedly made from the hand of a hanged man or murder victim, with a candle set into it. In those stories, the hand of glory could paralyze anyone who saw it, and was sometimes used by thieves or occult groups. Murray believed the woman might have been the victim of a ritual killing, possibly by a group with occult leanings traveling through the area. She also linked the case to another violent killing, the 1945 murder of Charles Walton in nearby Warwickshire, who was found pinned to the ground with a pitchfork, with one hand missing, in what local gossip immediately framed as witchcraft. Not everyone agrees with Murray's interpretations. She was known to see ritual patterns in many crimes, but the combination of a hidden body, a severed hand, and cryptic graffiti makes it easy for people to keep coming back to the occult angle. Theory 4, wartime espionage. Since the 1970s, some researchers have suggested that Bella was tangled up in WWII spy work. She could have been a German agent dropped into the area. Hagley is not too far from industrial and military sites that would have interested foreign intelligence. If she was part of a spy ring, someone might have dealt with her and concealed the body in a way they assumed would never be found. So far, no declassified files clearly back that up. But like all good spy theories, it benefits from silence and gaps in the record. Right now, almost 80 years later, what we can say with confidence is simple. A woman was killed sometime around late 1941. Her hand was removed. Her body was hidden in a tree on private land. No one ever came forward to claim her. Someone, maybe the killer, maybe a witness, later wrote that infamous question on a local monument. Everything after that is interpretation. If you've ever walked through a wooded area and felt like you were being watched, Remember that sometimes the scariest part of a story isn't the ghost in the tree. It's the fact that, in this case, a real woman died there. And we still don't know her name. 2. The Isdal Woman fire in Death Valley. Our second case takes us to Norway, November 1970. Locals around the city of Bergen know a steep, rugged area called Isdalen, Ice Valley. It has another nickname too, Death Valley. Historically, the cliffs there were dangerous. Hikers had fallen. Old legends even claim that in harsher times, elders who could no longer care for themselves were taken to high points and encouraged or helped to leap. On a cold Sunday, a father took his 2 daughters hiking on Mount Ulriken, overlooking Bergen. As they walked, one of the girls smelled smoke. Not the faint smell from a restaurant on the summit, this was closer, sharper. They followed it. At the base of a rocky slope among broken stones, they found the burned body of a woman lying on her back. She was so badly burned that her face was unrecognizable. The father rushed back to town to alert police. The girls, traumatized, went home. When officers and forensic teams arrived, they noticed something odd. The area around the body wasn't just random debris. Someone had arranged items near her, and they had all been scorched by the same fire. Jewelry, a watch, clothing items, a sweater, scarf, nylon stockings, rubber boots, a purse, plastic bottles, a liquor bottle, a box of matches, sleeping pills. Under the body, they found a piece of fur soaked in what smelled like gasoline. One more detail, all the labels and identifying marks on her things had been cut off or removed. Whoever this woman was, she or someone else, had gone to great lengths to make sure no one could trace her. Autopsy and suitcases. At the hospital in Bergen, doctors determined that the woman had died from a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning, smoke inhalation, and a massive overdose of sleeping pills. Her lungs contained soot, which meant she was alive while she burned. Bruising on her neck suggested she'd been gripped or dragged. Because her identity was completely unknown, investigators took tissue samples, removed her jaw, which had distinctive gold dental work. They hoped a dentist somewhere in Europe would recognize the pattern. A few days later, staff at Bergen railway station reported something. 2 unclaimed suitcases left in the luggage area. Inside, police found women's clothing, cosmetics, a purse with cash in various European currencies. Again, all labels and brand tags cut off. A notebook full of what looked like codes. There were no passports, at least not real ones. Later, investigators pieced together that the woman had traveled under multiple fake identities. Decoding her movements, cryptanalysts examined the notebook and realized the code wasn't complicated espionage ciphers. It was a travel log. Each line corresponded to a city or region, a date range. By matching those entries with handwritten guest registrations at hotels, police reconstructed months of travel. Italy, Germany, Switzerland, Norway, and back again. Always booking rooms under different names, often claiming to be from Belgium. Often speaking German or another European language. Always paying in cash. One Bergen hotel, the Hotel Horteheimen, reported that she checked into room 407, claimed to sell antiques, kept mostly to herself, seemed very nervous. At one point asked to change rooms without much explanation. Staff remembered her as attractive, about 30-40 years old, around 54, with dark hair and brown eyes, which matches the forensic reconstruction. Another hotel further along the trail remembered a similar woman, but described her as blonde, speaking Flemish. It's possible she changed her appearance between stops. Even with all of that, no one could say who she really was. Suicide, murder, or something else. After months of investigation, with no confirmed identity and no suspect, authorities made a controversial call. They listed her death as a probable suicide. On paper, there were reasons. Overdose of sleeping pills. Fire started with gasoline and matches. No clear sign of another person at the immediate scene. But there were serious problems with that explanation. Most people who take their own life don't. Travel through multiple countries on false passports, strip every label off their belongings, set themselves on fire while sedated. Some of her injuries suggested she may have been handled roughly before the fire. Her jaw and dental work pointed to money or access to expensive care at some point. She was buried in an unmarked grave in 1971. Only a few police officers attended, but the story didn't stay buried. Spy theories and a witness too late. Norway in the late 1960s and early 70s was not just fjords and fishing. It was a frontline NATO country with sensitive military installations. Over time, journalists and researchers have pointed out the woman's recorded travel pattern lines up suspiciously well with weapons tests, including trials of the Norwegian-developed Penguin anti-ship missile. Mysterious individuals had been spotted in other parts of Norway near military bases, later linked to confirmed espionage activity. She carried multiple false identities and moved like someone trained to avoid leaving a trail. One local fisherman later claimed he'd seen a woman matching her description watching naval exercises from the coast near the city of Stavanger. Then, in 2005, more than 3 decades after the body was found, another witness came forward. He said, years earlier, about 5 days before the burned body was discovered, he'd been hiking on Mount Floyen, not far from where the woman was found. He'd noticed a woman in light city clothes, totally unsuited for the weather and terrain, staring off into space as if preoccupied. 2 dark-haired men in heavy coats were following her at a distance. When they saw the witness, they stopped talking and watched him until he moved on. According to his story, after the national manhunt went public, he tried to report what he'd seen, but was visited by security officials who told him strongly to forget it. Is that true? We can't prove it, but it fits a pattern that people now find hard to ignore. An unidentified woman with spy-like habits, strange behavior near military activity, a death staged to look like suicide, with signs it might not have been. Hints of official discomfort whenever the case resurfaces. Today, people still argue about the Isdal Woman. Some insist she was a spy whose handlers eliminated her. Others think she was a deeply troubled traveler whose end was made stranger by coincidence and poor documentation. A few still hold out for entirely different explanations. What's hard to dispute is this. She prepared for anonymity, cutting labels, using aliases. She died in terror and pain, alive while she burned. Someone, somewhere, almost certainly knows exactly who she was, and chose never to come forward. If you've watched this far and want more long, detailed cases like these, let me know by liking the video and subscribing. Next up are stories that hit a lot closer to everyday life. A volunteer on a remote farm, a federal prosecutor who never made it home, a missing little boy, a legendary hiking disaster, and 2 encounters with danger that started with just saying hi. 3. The farm on the mountain. Volunteers' narrow escape. This next story is told from the perspective of a man looking back on something that happened in his mid-20s when he was trying to figure his life out. He'd finished college in Washington State, deep in debt, stuck in a small town, and watching job listings that either wanted 10 years of experience or paid almost nothing. Depressed and restless, he decided to do what a lot of people do when they feel trapped: leave. Friends told him about a program where you work on farms in exchange for food and a place to stay, about 20-25 hours a week. In return, you get to travel cheaply, meet people, and live somewhere new for a while. He tried a few farms in the US, Washington, Oregon, California, then saved enough under the table cash to buy an international ticket. On a friend's dare, he used a random country picker online. It landed on Georgia, the country, not the US state. He knew almost nothing about it. That was part of the appeal. He booked the ticket, found a listing for a small farm on top of a mountain in a Georgian national park, and messaged the owner. The listing showed a stone house with a big garden, talked about a family, parents, kids, grandparents, promised reasonable hours and a simple, peaceful life. The English in the description was surprisingly good. The pictures looked warm and welcoming. He was excited. Arrival. After landing in Tbilisi, the capital, he followed the written directions. Long bus rides on old Soviet coaches, taxis on twisting mountain roads. Eventually, a rough dirt track leading up into the trees. It took close to 20 hours of travel to reach the pin on his map. At the end of the track was a steep hill with only forest, and far up the slope, what looked like a lonely, tired-looking house. From a distance, the place looked overgrown, brown and sagging, not at all like the bright photos he'd seen. As he approached the gate, a stocky, middle-aged man came out to meet him, smiling broadly. We'll call him Georgi. Georgi shook his hand, welcomed him in broken English, and immediately started a tour. Up close, the farm was clearly in trouble. Fruit trees dying back, a barn roof partially collapsed, the main house smelling of mold and filled with broken furniture and old trash. There were no children, no grandparents, no sign of any other adults. When the visitor asked about the family from the listing, Georgi brushed it off. They're away right now. He also smelled strongly of alcohol, but it was late. The traveler had been on the road for nearly 2 days. There was no cell service, no easy way back down, and no other houses in sight. He decided to stay the night and reassess in the morning. Georgi fed him a large meal, tried to chat as best he could, and then showed him to a small room on the second floor. The visitor collapsed into bed and blacked out within minutes. Night noise. Sometime deep in the night, he woke up. From somewhere below, he heard a heavy, metallic scraping sound, as if something large was being dragged across wooden floorboards. Half asleep, he listened for a few seconds, decided it was none of his business, and slipped back under. In the morning, Georgi seemed more sober, but also more irritable. He said he was going to a nearby village to get supplies and asked the volunteer to fix windows and doors around the house while he was gone. There was still no phone signal, no internet, no neighbors in sight. When Georgi left, the visitor decided to really look around. The more he explored, the clearer it became that this house hadn't been properly lived in for a long time. There were old photos on the floor, torn newspapers, broken mirrors. It looked more like an abandoned building than a family home. Something felt very wrong. He pulled up the original online listing on his phone, cached from earlier, and compared the pictures. The backyard looked different. The garden layout didn't match. The walls and windows were not the same. Georgi wasn't in any of the photos. He realized this place was not the farm advertised. That uneasy feeling in his spine turned into full-on alarm. The three men. He grabbed his bag, packed as fast as he could, and headed for the path back down the hill. Just as he came around the side of the house, he saw three men coming up the first hill toward the property. Georgi was not with them. There was no other obvious route out. He ducked behind the house, slid down through the trees, and ran into the forest. He didn't know how far he went before he stopped, just far enough that he couldn't hear his own breath over the pounding in his ears. Then he listened. He could hear the men moving around the house above, entering, searching. He stayed hidden in the undergrowth, trying not to make a sound. Time passed, minutes, an hour, until he finally heard them leaving. He counted slowly to give himself more of a buffer, then crept back up toward the path. The house was silent. The men were gone. He didn't wait to think about it. He ran down the hill, found the dirt road, and kept walking until he hit pavement. There was still no traffic, no buses, just empty countryside. Eventually, after hours of walking, a car approached. He braced himself, half expecting a worst-case scenario, that it would be Georgi and the other men. Instead, it was a Russian family on a road trip. They picked him up, listened to the bare-bones version of his story, and drove him to the nearest town. When he went back online days later, the farm listing was gone. He never heard from Georgi again. To this day, he doesn't know whether the three men were just locals curious about a stranger, Georgi had planned something worse and brought help, or he simply panicked and ran from a situation that might have been harmless. But standing on that remote mountaintop with no phone, no neighbors, a fake listing, and three unknown men walking up the only path, his gut told him to run, and he's still convinced that gut feeling saved his life. If a place ever feels wrong from top to bottom, advertising doesn't match reality, you're isolated, and your host seems off, remember this story. You don't owe anyone your presence just because you booked a stay. For the death of Jonathan Luna, homicide or something else. Now we're back in the United States, in the world of federal courts and long, late nights at the office. Jonathan Luna was born in 1965 in New York City, the son of a Filipino father and an African-American mother. He grew up in the South Bronx, in the Patterson Houses projects near Yankee Stadium. By all accounts, he did everything right. Studied hard, went to Fordham University, then law school at the University of North Carolina, worked at a major Washington, D.C. firm and at the Federal Trade Commission. Eventually became an assistant U.S. attorney in Baltimore, Maryland. He married a doctor. They had 2 sons. Friends described them as a solid, happy family. At work, Luna handled serious federal prosecutions, including violent drug cases. In late 2003, he was in the middle of a case involving alleged heroin dealers tied to a small record label called Stash House Records, and at least one defendant also facing a homicide charge. On December 3, 2003, Luna worked late at the federal courthouse in Baltimore, trying to finalize a plea deal. Around 9 p.m., he called a colleague and said he was just wrapping up. Security records show he didn't actually leave the building until close to 11:40 p.m. He left his glasses behind on his desk, even though he needed them to drive. The drive north. What we know next comes from road cameras, ATM and toll records, where his car was found. Sometime after midnight, Luna drove north out of Baltimore into Delaware, where his bank card was used to withdraw $200. Then through New Jersey and into Pennsylvania, with another cash withdrawal along the way. Curiously, although his car had an EZ pass for automated tolls and it registered at least once, at other points he took paper toll tickets instead. Why someone used both, and who exactly was driving the whole time, has never been fully explained. At around 5:30 a.m. on December 4th, an employee at a well drilling company near Denver, Pennsylvania, arrived for work. He noticed a car parked near the creek behind the building. It was splattered with blood. He called police. Officers found blood on the door and fender, blood-stained cash in the car, a large pool of blood on the back seat. Not far away in the shallow creek, they found Jonathan Luna's body. He had more than 30 stab wounds, many to his torso and hands, cuts on his neck and genitals. Ultimately, medical examiners said he died from blood loss and drowning. The wounds appeared to have been inflicted with his own pocket knife. Based on the blood pattern, investigators believed most of the stabbing happened inside the car, likely on the back seat, before he somehow ended up in the creek. There were unidentified fingerprints in the blood and indications of a struggle. On its face, it looked like a particularly brutal homicide. The controversial ruling. Initially, that's how local authorities treated it, but things got murkier fast. At some point, an FBI agent reportedly instructed the pathologist to consider the possibility of suicide, to change the manner of death on the paperwork. This baffled many people. Some of Luna's wounds were on his back, in places that would be very difficult to stab yourself repeatedly. The number and placement of the injuries looked more like torture or a frenzy attack than self-harm. At the same time, rumors began circulating in the media that money, around $36,000, was missing from a court account tied to one of Luna's cases. He might have been under pressure at work. He may have been afraid of something coming out about his personal life. None of those rumors have ever been fully verified or publicly resolved. What we do know is, Luna had enemies by the nature of his job. He helped put dangerous people in prison. He was working on cases that allegedly involved violent criminals and possibly politically sensitive targets. Some colleagues and observers have long suspected that Luna may have been lured or forced on that late-night drive, that he was attacked in the car, then dumped in the creek, and that certain people in law enforcement or government didn't want a messy, public homicide tied to a federal prosecutor, especially if it overlapped with other sensitive issues. No one has ever been charged with Jonathan Luna's death. Officially, the case remains unresolved. Whether you think it was a tragic, bizarre suicide or a covered-up murder, one thing is clear. He left home that night planning to finish work and come back to his family. He never made it. 5. Timothy Pitzen, the boy who vanished on a road trip. Our next case starts like a normal school day in Aurora, Illinois, in May 2011. 6-year-old Timothy Pitzen lived with his parents, Amy and James, and had a big extended family who doted on him. On the morning of May 11th, James made breakfast, dropped Timothy off at kindergarten at Greenman Elementary School, went to work. Later that morning, around 8 a.m., Amy showed up at the school. She told staff there was a family emergency and she needed to take Timothy out for the day. The school released him to his mother. No one knew it would be the last time Timothy was ever seen in class. The trip Instead of going to any kind of meeting or hospital, Amy drove Timothy to a local auto repair shop where she dropped off her car, a nearby zoo in Brookfield where security cameras later captured them spending several hours together. They went on rides, saw the animals, and seemed calm and happy on video. After picking up her car that afternoon, Amy drove north to Gurnee, Illinois, and checked into a resort with a water park. Again, cameras show Timothy at the water park that evening. The two stayed overnight at the resort. The next day, they crossed into Wisconsin. Amy checked into another resort in the Wisconsin Dells area. Security footage there also shows Timothy alive and with her. On May 13th, Amy made a series of phone calls to her mother, her brother-in-law. She told them that she and Timothy were safe and that there was no need to worry. Family members later confirmed they could hear Timothy's voice in the background, complaining that he was hungry. Cell tower records placed the calls near Sterling, Illinois, suggesting they were on the move again. Conspicuously, Amy did not call her husband. That was the last confirmed time anyone heard Timothy's voice. The note. On May 14th, Amy checked into a budget motel in Rockford, Illinois, alone. The next day, a housekeeper entered her room around noon and found Amy Pitzen lying on the bed in a pool of blood, a knife nearby, empty packaging for antihistamine pills. She had died by slashing her own wrists and throat after taking a large overdose of medication. She left a note that said, among other things, she was sorry, Timothy was safe with people who would care for him, and that no one would ever find him. Investigators found no sign of Timothy at the motel, no evidence in the room that a child had recently stayed there. In Amy's car, traces of Timothy's blood were present, but family members explained that he had suffered a bad nosebleed in the car shortly before the trip, which likely accounted for it. Dirt and plant material on the undercarriage suggested she had driven on rural, unpaved roads, possibly near a stream or field. Her cell phone was missing at first, but eventually turned up discarded by a roadside. It didn't contain any clear clues about where she'd taken Timothy, despite ground searches, checks of relatives and known acquaintances, national media coverage. No confirmed trace of Timothy has ever been found. False hope and open questions. Over the years, age-progressed images have been released showing what Timothy might look like as he grows. In 2019, national news exploded when a young man in Kentucky claimed to be Timothy Pitzen, saying he had just escaped from kidnappers. DNA tests quickly proved he was not Timothy. He was a 23-year-old man with his own issues, and the claim was a hoax. For Timothy's father, James, it was a crushing roller coaster of hope and disappointment. Aurora police have said repeatedly, the case remains open. They have no evidence that Timothy is dead. They also have no solid lead on where he might be. There are a few main possibilities. 1. Amy placed Timothy with someone she trusted off the grid, and those people have kept the promise never to return him. 2. She harmed him in a way that left no easily found evidence, and her note was a lie meant to soften the blow. 3. A third party became involved in ways investigators haven't been able to trace. None of those options are comforting. What keeps this case alive is that, unlike many missing child stories, there is no body, no confirmed crime scene for Timothy himself, just a mother's last words and a boy who vanished between camera frames. If cases like this interest you, take a second to like the video and subscribe. and maybe share age-progressed images from official sources once in a while. You never know who might recognize a face. 6. The Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 hikers, one terrible night. Our next case is one of the most argued over mysteries in modern history. The 1959 Dyatlov Pass incident in the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. 9 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, all young, fit, and well-trained, set out on a winter trek in late January 1959. Their goal was to reach Mount Otorten and return in time to report back to their sports club. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a respected and careful leader. They planned to be back to civilization around February 12th. When that date came and went with no word, no one panicked immediately. Winter hikes could easily run a few days late. By February 20th, with still no contact, relatives and fellow students pushed for a search operation. Rescuers from the institute, local authorities, and eventually the Soviet military joined the hunt. The tent. On February 26th, searchers found the group's tent, partially collapsed, on the slopes of Kalet Siekal, a name that roughly translates from the local Mansi language as Dead Mountain. The scene was bizarre. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. Most of the hikers' boots and outer clothing were still inside. Supplies and equipment were laid out as if they had been in the middle of preparing for the night. Footprints in the snow, some bare, some in socks, some with a single boot, led downhill toward a forested area. The tracks didn't show signs of a panic stampede. They looked like people moving quickly but orderly away from the tent. About 1.5 kilometers downslope at the edge of the forest, searchers found the remains of a small fire beneath a tall cedar tree. The bodies of 2 hikers, wearing only underwear near the fire. Branches of the cedar were broken high up, as if someone had climbed the tree, maybe to look back at the tent or for shelter. Between the tree line and the tent, they found the bodies of 3 more hikers, including Dyatlov himself, spaced out in the snow, as if they had been trying to crawl back uphill to camp. It took 2 more months as the snow melted to find the last 4. They were in a ravine further into the forest, under several meters of snow. Unlike the others, some of them were wearing pieces of clothing taken from the first bodies. Injuries that don't add up. Initial medical reports. The first 5 hikers found, near the tree and in the open snow, appeared to have died of hypothermia. One had a minor skull injury, but not enough to explain death on its own. The 4 in the ravine were different. One had massive skull fractures. 2 had severe chest injuries, comparable to the force of a car crash. Several had missing eyes, and 1 woman was missing her tongue. There were no major external wounds on their chests that matched the internal damage. Some of their clothing showed traces of radioactivity. At the time, the official conclusion was vague. An unknown compelling force led to their deaths. Over the years, theories have ranged from avalanche, katabatic wind, a rare, violent downslope wind causing panic, infrasound causing irrational fear, military tests gone wrong, secret weapons, even UFOs. Recent Russian and independent studies have revived the avalanche or slab slide theory, arguing that a small, delayed snow slab could have partially buried the tent, forcing the group to cut their way out and move to safer ground in the forest. Later collapses or falls into the ravine could have caused the internal injuries without obvious external trauma. Skeptics of that explanation point out. The slope where the tent stood had no clear avalanche debris at the time of discovery. Many later expeditions found no obvious avalanche patterns there. The radioactive clothing and reported strange lights in the sky from other witnesses in the region that winter complicate the picture. What's certain is that 9 capable young adults left a tent in sub-zero temperatures underdressed, split up under stress. Some tried to shelter under a tree and in a ravine. None survived the night. Whether you blame snow science, secret tests, or something stranger, Dyatlov Pass is a reminder of how quickly the wilderness and human fear can take over. 7. The Road Through the Woods, 4 Cloaked Figures. The next story isn't a famous historical case. It's from someone remembering a night when a simple drive with friends turned into something out of a horror film. In the late 2000s, a teenager in California lived near a little used road called Cloaked Road. It was narrow and poorly maintained, surrounded by patches of forest, old barns, and abandoned houses. A local spot for skating, exploring, and killing time. One night, he and 2 friends, Lucas and Dorian, talked his older brother James into driving them out there. They weren't drinking, not partying. They just wanted to walk some gravel trails in a nearby nature reserve. Maybe take pictures at a small pond Dorian liked. They drove down a side path until the trees closed in too tightly for James's SUV. They got out, walked for a while in the woods as it got dark, and eventually turned back. On the way out, they decided to take a different side path toward the pond. The road grew worse, rutted, narrow, crawling speed only. The boys were in good spirits, joking, watching the trees slide by in the headlights. Then they rounded a bend and saw 4 people in the middle of the road. All 4 were wearing long, dark cloaks with hoods up, carrying flashlights. One of them dragging a large duffel bag that looked uncomfortably close to human-sized. Everyone in the car went silent. James slowed to a crawl. The headlights lit the group fully. The strangers stopped and turned toward the car, faces obscured. On that rough track, James couldn't just floor it blindly. He edged the SUV past them as close as a few feet away. From the passenger seat, the narrator could see them clearly. Cloaks, hoods, gloved hands on the flashlights and bag. No one spoke until the road straightened out. Then James muttered, "What was that?" They drove on in silence for another half-minute, until Lucas looked back out the rear window and said, "Oh my God, they're coming." The narrator twisted in his seat and saw 4 shaking beams of light cutting through the dark, moving fast up the road toward them. The figures were running. James hit the gas as much as he could without tearing the car apart. The SUV bounced and slammed over potholes and berms. The boys watched the flashlight beams gain and then disappear as they rounded another curve. Eventually, the path rejoined the main gravel road. James didn't slow down until they were back on Cloaked Road and headed toward home. They didn't see the cloaked figures again. They didn't report it. Looking back years later, the narrator still wonders, how did those 4 people get deep into that reserve with no visible vehicles? What was in the bag? Were they just a group of cosplayers or a LARPing group with terrible timing? Or something else entirely? For him, the memory is a simple lesson. If you're out at night, far from help, and something feels off, you don't have to stop and investigate. Sometimes it's okay for the horror story to end with, "and then we drove away." 8. Wendell, when being nice, crosses a line. This story starts out like a lot of everyday campus interactions. You see the same person on the corner every day. You give them change when you can. You say hello. At a college in a U.S. city, a student used to pass a panhandler nicknamed Wendell near campus. Wendell sang opera pieces surprisingly well, made jokes and impressions for passing students, seemed older, maybe in his 40s or 50s, asked for money but also tried to entertain, which the student respected. The student had a personal rule about donating mainly to organized charities, but Wendell felt different. It seemed fair to hand him spare coins once in a while. Over time, they chatted very briefly a few times a week, about weather, news, whatever. Shared small personal details. Wendell mentioned once that drugs had ruined his shot at a baseball scholarship. One day, the student walked past with an academic advisor. Wendell called them over by name. Afterward, the advisor pulled the student aside and said something like, "You really shouldn't get close to the homeless population here. A lot of the chronically homeless in this city have criminal records or serious addictions." The student thought the advisor was being elitist and judgmental, and doubled down on being kind to Wendell. Wendell started bringing small gifts. A flower, a little piece of metal he'd found. Random objects, he said, made him think of the student. The student didn't see harm in it. It seemed like a way for Wendell to keep his dignity while accepting help. The advisor raised the issue again later, gently pointing out Wendell had a history of substance use. He spoke of an ex-girlfriend in ways that sounded obsessive. It might be safer to set boundaries. The student listened but didn't fully act on it. Then the pandemic hit. Classes went remote. The student moved back to a small hometown in the same state. Wendell became a faded background character in their life. The move and the first red flags. Weeks later at home, the student was watching a friend's Instagram story. In the background, faint but unmistakable, they heard Wendell's opera singing. The catch: the story was shot in the student's hometown, hours away from campus. That was unsettling, but coincidences happen. People relocate. The student brushed it off. Not long after, a friend from high school who also attended the same college called and said, "This is going to sound weird, but a homeless guy downtown asked about you by name. He knew you played club volleyball, knew your major. I didn't tell him anything, but I thought you should know." The friend was wearing a college sweatshirt, so it made sense Wendell might have guessed the connection. Still, the idea that he had followed the student's life into another city was unnerving. Eventually, the student moved back near campus to focus on online classes. Within a week, Wendell was back on his old corner as if nothing had changed. The student decided to stop giving him money, stop stopping to chat, hope he would take the hint. They didn't tell anyone about it, partly out of embarrassment at having ignored earlier warnings. The knock at the door. After finals, the student drove to another state to stay with an older brother while his roommates were gone. They were strict about quarantine, no visitors, no random drop-ins. One morning, much earlier than usual, the brother was at the front door, speaking quietly to someone outside. He came back furious, whisper yelling that their parents were going to kill the student for dating a 40-year-old man and inviting him over during a pandemic. The student had no idea what he was talking about. Through the confusion, it came out. A man at the door claimed to be the student's boyfriend. He gave the student's full name, major, activities, and details that proved he knew a lot. He said they'd had a fight and he'd come to fix things. The student finally looked through the peephole. It was Wendell, cleaned up, shaved, wearing mismatched but newer clothes, hundreds of miles from the original campus corner. The student's heart dropped. They backed away from the door, shaking. The brother, still assuming this was some secret older boyfriend, went back to the door and tried to send him away. "She's not here. You need to leave." Wendell replied, "You're lying. I heard her. Tell her I'm sorry. I cleaned up for her. I'll take her wherever she wants to go. Don't lie. I'll know if you lie." His tone was off, less like someone hurt, more like someone issuing a threat. The brother told him again to leave. Instead of walking away, Wendell moved toward the window. When the student peeked out, he was staring straight in, eyes wide and unfocused, white crust at the corners of his mouth, hands shaking. He started banging on the glass, shouting, "That's my girlfriend. You can't keep her in there. Let her out. I'm coming for you, baby." The student froze. The brother got ready to physically remove him if needed. Before that could happen, Wendell punched through the window. For a moment, there was an eerie pause. Then blood started pouring from his hand as he pulled it back. He shouted disjointed phrases. "Look what you did to me. This is a test. I told you I couldn't be stopped." The sight of the blood snapped everyone into reality. The brother yelled for the student to call 911. Police arrived within minutes. They found Wendell at the door, still insisting his girlfriend was being held inside. Momentarily detained the brother until it was clear no one was being held hostage. Wendell went quietly when they handcuffed him. As they led him away, he started singing opera again. Standing in the broken glass, the student had to face the hard truth. All those small warning signs, oversharing gifts, jealousy, following them across cities, weren't harmless. Trying to be the nice, enlightened person had allowed a line to get crossed over and over until it was dangerous. The lesson here isn't never be kind to anyone on the street. It's this. If someone, anyone, starts ignoring your boundaries and inserting themselves into your life, you're allowed to step back, tell trusted people, involve authorities if it escalates. Being nice doesn't mean letting yourself be cornered. 9. The MMO catfish, when a scam goes too far. Our last story is about someone who freely admits they were the villain until what they were doing nearly pushed someone else over the edge. From about age 11 to 16, this person was obsessed with MMORPGs, massive online role-playing games. They played for hours every day, built tight-knit friend groups, cared deeply about in-game status, gear, outfits, mounts, rare items. They also had no job. Parents who weren't going to spend real money on virtual outfits and upgrade items. So, around 13, 14 years old, they came up with what they thought was a clever workaround. They created characters presenting as teen girls, used photos of real girls found on public profiles, flirted with lonely teenage boys in-game, and then nudged them into buying in-game items and cosmetics. At first it was a single boy, a single outfit, just one gift, they told themselves, but the rush of getting expensive gear for free was strong. They kept going. Over the next few years, they juggled online relationships with multiple players, accepted gifted items, cash shop currency and upgrades, told themselves the boys would be fine. They rarely thought about whether those boys were stealing money from parents. They were in poor families. They were genuinely attached to a person who didn't exist. At 16, on a popular online shooter, they met Mark, a 23-year-old player from Russia. Mark didn't spend money on the game. He was a free-to-play grinder, seemed kind, funny, and genuinely into them as the girl persona, had mutual friends with them in-game, had a rough life, mental health issues, a history of self-harm. The scammer decided to date him online anyway, seeing it as their biggest challenge yet. Could I convince a free player to spend on me? They started voice chatting in groups on Skype, sending cute messages, doing the usual long-distance, pseudo-romantic routine. For a while it worked. Mark was attentive, affectionate, and increasingly possessive. He bad-mouthed their other in-game friends, tried to isolate them by saying others were talking behind their back, sent doctored screenshots proving it, got angry if they talked to other male players. The scammer ignored the red flags because they liked the attention. They still planned to get gifts out of him. The line they almost crossed. Then a new premium outfit dropped in the game, exactly the kind they usually scammed people for. They brought it up casually in chat. Mark immediately said, "We should get it together." The scammer replied that they had no money. Mark suggested stealing money from his single mother, who was already struggling. In that moment, something broke through the fog. The scammer realized this wasn't just digital stuff. If Mark stole from his mom, there'd be real-world consequences for a woman who had nothing to do with any of this. They logged off abruptly, feeling sick. All the past gifts, all the manipulated boys crashed down on them. For a whole day, they avoided getting back online. The meltdown. When they finally opened Skype again, their screen filled with wall after wall of angry messages from Mark. He demanded to know where they'd gone, called them names, accused them of cheating with other guys. They tried to break up with him using a half-true excuse. That games were making them more depressed, that they needed to get out and see the real world. Mark didn't take it well. He cried and yelled over voice chat, said they had ruined his life, threatened to kill himself if they left. He began smashing things in the background. Then he turned on his webcam. On camera, he held a razor to his wrist, showing old scars from past cuts, and said he would do it live if they quit on him. The scammer froze. They vomited from stress, logged off mid-call, spent the day crying and realizing karma had caught up. The next day, they logged back in, intending to end it cleanly. Mark had sent photos of fresh cuts on his arm, more messages telling them they were responsible. They tried again to break up. Mark repeated the same threat. "If you leave, I'll kill myself." For the first time, they pushed back. "If that's what you're going to do, why haven't you already?" He went quiet, shocked. They told him he needed help they couldn't give. He was being unfair, putting his entire life and death on a teenager he'd never met. They weren't staying, no matter what he did. Then they blocked him everywhere. They never heard from him again. To this day, they don't know if he was bluffing, if he actually hurt himself worse, if he is still alive. But they stopped catfishing after that. They realized all those harmless scams involved real people with real problems. It wasn't just about armor sets and outfits. You can't control how fragile or unstable someone on the other end of the chat might be. The horror in this story isn't a ghost or a monster. It's the sick feeling of realizing you've been the villain in someone else's life, and that walking away too late might still have broken something you can never fix. If you made it all the way through these stories, thank you for sticking with me. If you'd like more long, carefully told horror and true mystery scripts like this, the best way to support the work is simply to like the video and subscribe. It's free for you, and it helps a lot more than you might think.